Welcome back to the Jackie Kaminski Experience, where we break down the biggest myths, mistakes, and strategies in sports nutrition so you can actually perform at your best. In today's episode, it's all about the absolute worst weight cuts we've ever seen, the dumbest thing fighters have done to make weight, and the behind the scenes stories that nobody talks about. And I could not do this without bringing on my special guest, my best mentor, colleague, and friend, the great Tony Ricci. And Tony, I'm going to talk about you because anyone who doesn't know you needs to know you. I love you so much. You've been my biggest advocate and biggest supporter since day one. And I learned so much from you when I first started. So if you guys do not know Tony, you need to. He has done so much for this space. He is currently an assistant professor at the Departments of Human Health and Performance and Psychology and Neuroscience at Nova University. He holds 10,000 master's degrees and a doctorate in sports psychology. He's the owner of his company, Fight Shape International, and he's worked with so many elite level athletes, tons of world champions in MMA, boxing, kickboxing. You spent most of your time in Long Island at
Sarah
Wildest.
Longo, yeah.
Yeah, it was Sarah Longo. Yep. And he's published numerous peer-reviewed publications. He's spoken all over the world at over 50 conferences on topics of health, fitness, human performance, sports nutrition, sports psychology, sports neuroscience. This man knows it all, okay? He is an absolute genius. So I am so grateful to have him on today. Tony, hello.
And thank you, Jacqueline, for that wonderful introduction. And it's nice to be across from you because guess we met about 7 years ago, and you've done so much since. I'm quite proud of you. I've watched it from I guess shortly after you graduated to where you are now, right?
Exactly, yeah. I reached out to you, what, right when, yeah, I finished school, I think, is when we got connected.
Yeah, and I think it was at one of the first Fight Science seminars. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, yeah. So today, obviously, you want to talk about the horrors of weight cuts. I mean, we talk about it all the time. I know I've tried to talk about it at certain conferences. We always discuss, like, everyone always wants to get into this because they think it's so cool and no one understands the ugly truth or the ugly side of what it means to be in fight sports. Nor does anyone teach it.
Right.
There's no school, there's nothing that could prepare you to get into this space. Um, and I know I have called you in the middle of the night many a times with my own personal emergencies trying to get your opinion
From
on
all
what
over the
to
globe
do.
at times too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm always traveling all over the world too. So all right, so I want to kick things off with asking you, what comes to mind when I say, in terms of weight cut disasters, what comes to mind when, you think of worst of the worst? For you and all your 40 plus years of doing this and seeing this, what comes to mind when you think of, okay, the dumbest thing that every fighter has done or dumbest advice they've received or just moments where you're like, holy crap.
Yeah, so Jackie, I think first, in some cases, in the fighter's defense, Jack, it's not like some of the greatest disasters were not their fault. And what I mean by that, in the early days of the UFC, and maybe not super early, not in the 90s per se, but even mid 2000s up until about 012, fighters got a lot of last minute calls, right? Like they got calls 2 weeks out before a fight. Now, that happens occasionally only on injury now. But so some of the craziest things, I'll start with the craziest things. We're seeing people having to lose 30 pounds in 2 weeks.
We've
Okay. And sometimes even less because you have an individual, a young fighter that may have their first opportunity to get into the UFC. And Dana, or at the time, I think it was Joe Silva was making some of these matchups. Nevertheless, they get a call, like I think in 1 and 011, 2 weeks out to make 185. And heck, never mind 30. They're probably about 220 at the time. So now they got 2 weeks to lose 35 pounds, right? So that in itself, the very nature of the sport in the early days made it crazy. And people would have to, they're not losing much fat in 2 weeks. You can't do it. Now you can glycogen deplete, pull off 3, 4 pounds if you're a big dude, right? Maybe you're going to burn 3 pounds of fat if you do everything perfectly, strip 3, 4 pounds of muscle. But nevertheless, to reiterate, I worked with somebody who lost 35 pounds for their first fight to get to 185 in the UFC, and they had 2 weeks under 2 weeks technically to do that. So that to me was the ultimate in craziness, right? There weren't, I mean, I don't know how many hours in a sauna. I don't know how many hot baths. You're basically looking too at water restriction for nearly a week, right? By
Yeah.
one individual. So
Was that in
hands
the very
down.
beginning, like when you first got into it?
Yeah, I would. Well, I was
Okay.
actually not so much working with the UFC fighters as much as that time. I was more in boxing and kickboxing.
Okay.
So it was my earlier days. So about 010, I was doing performance training for UFC fighters, but not so much the weight cuts. So
Okay.
that's actually kind of when I got involved. So it was a 35 pounder in less than in less than 14 days. And I want to emphasize something right from the beginning, because I know that there will be a lot of times like you and I will get critiqued for speaking honestly about this. We don't make the rules of this sport.
Mm.
Okay, the state athletic commission does, and the governing body that the promotion does, right? So we are just doing the best we can within the regulations. Because people have said to me a lot of times, Jackie, you're crazy. You let this happen. You're doing this. Well, if they do it without us, it's probably going to be worse. That is why we're there. So right up front, I need to say that in defense of everybody out there doing weight cuts. They don't make the rules. They are trying to help these people do crazy things with some logic along the process.
How many times do you hear me say, we talk about it? I say, our job is not to keep them healthy. Our job is to keep them from dying.
In some cases, it
They're
is.
gonna, we're literally
Yes.
saving lives. We're preventing death.
Right, and you're going to get scrutinized for that, right? You
Yeah.
are. But again, they are going to do this process with or without you. Now,
Hmm.
if someone wants to step away, I'm good with that and just say, hey, look, I can't do this. I can't watch this. But we are preventing them from severe effects sometimes, and doing it at least to the best capacity to try to preserve their health, right? But when you start getting 30 pounds, 35 pounds in 13 days on somebody who's 220 and wants to make middleweight, and you know what? They're going to go fight.
Oh
They're
yeah.
going to make that weight with or without you, right?
And they're
So
gonna do anything to get there. It doesn't matter.
exactly. So all we can do is try to guide them to the best of our capacity during that process. And we've even seen this, at the high levels where people at the highest levels who are maybe even working hypothetically for the UFC have to do the same thing. 13%, 14% weight drop in 24 hours, right? But a
Which
lot of
is
money involved. So
so, yeah, when the money's involved, and I mean, you heard me talk about it in my presentation at ISSN, when we're talking about, like, at least in my experiences, because I feel when we talk about it, especially in the space, it's the norm for us. So it's like if
right,
we hear, oh
right.
yeah, they have to cut 40 pounds in a month, or they got, 2.5 weeks to drop 35. We're like, yeah, that's normal. Like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, you cut
we're
15 pounds
not
in one night?
shocked by
Sure.
it.
Like,
Exactly. You're not
um,
shocked.
and everyone else,
We're
their
not
mouth
thrilled.
drops to the floor. They're like, what do you mean?
You're exactly right. And we're not shocked. Like we'll go, okay, oh great. We're gonna have to go through this again. But to your point, I don't know if anything would surprise us at this
No,
point.
no. I think, like, what also makes me laugh too is because obviously, like the PI, Charles at the PI, they've done so much and they're putting out so much data and information. So now we have our
Yep.
recommendations, right? We're guiding people. We're like, okay, in order to have a safe cut, you need to show up within here. So we're teaching it and we're talking about it. And it's like the reality is, okay, you want someone showing up under 10% a week out? That's not happening 90% of the
And it's
time.
not.
Like,
It really is not. And there's a bunch of more data probably coming out to show that.
yeah.
We just put out the ISSN position stand, and we recommended that in off camp the athlete stay at about 12 to 15%, even when there's no scheduled fight, above their weight class. And boy, I'd be ecstatic. Okay. Because many are coming in 12 to 15% 2 weeks out.
My God, you're giving me. I just every time we talk about this, I get flashbacks to that one fighter I told you about who was to 198 pounds, and he gave me 4 weeks to make 155.
So, okay, it's only 43 pounds.
That's fine. That's doable. What? It's so easy. Without Ozempic too, which is crazy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Free of it. Yeah, and they think nothing of it. Like the fighter's kind of like, well, I know it'll be tough, but yeah, I got to lose 40 pounds, and they just shake it off. And I think also too, we're dealing with a population that's a high risk population. Look what they do for
Yeah.
a living, right? Sometimes I wonder if they're actually driven, amygdala driven, very like emotionally or reaction driven to the challenges, not only of the fight and the training, but the cut itself. I've seen some people who just they kind of are all right mentally when they're going through this crazy process. And I'm wondering if there's a side of them that I'm not saying they love it, but they like the inherent risk. It's very possible.
There's something about being miserable that is
Yeah,
addicting to them.
same
Yeah.
thing.
No, they're all psychopaths. Okay, so so you've seen a ton of weight cuts in your time, and knowing what you know, what are some of like the most ridiculous things that you start to see fighters do, whether it's the way they start talking, the methods that they're cutting? I want to get some tea. What are some?
I will tell you, here's some of the biggest problems is they they'll go on social media and they hear, so it's very hard sometimes to run a cut or
Hmm.
a good longitudinal weight descent for 10 to 12 weeks because
100%.
the guys are going to go, more the guys than the women. Women, in my view, just they, in my view, listen more, and
100%.
to their benefit and sometimes to the fault, because they're very loyal to people who may not be doing well by them. So I credit women with that, but dudes are all over the map. They're doing the weight cut, and this guy's doing this, and this guy's doing that. So one of the biggest problems you have is they hear weight loss supplements or things that are going to expedite the weight loss process. So right in the middle of your entire program, they're buying a bunch of different crap. And then somebody comes out with a different strategy, a fellow fighter, and they swear by that, and then they're not eating for 3 days. Or they're like, I've had guys say, well, the way he cuts is he fasts for 3 days and then he eats a lot on the fourth day. And we're already 6 weeks, 5 weeks into the camp. So there's this incessant desire to continuously try to find something new or change what you and I spend hours planning an entire program for a 10, 12-week cut. Estimated caloric intake, maybe general macronutrient balance. We project what the descent might be. And then every single day, they're eating something different because somebody told them that, or they're taking a new supplement because somebody told them this will expedite fat burning, or then somebody else got in their ear and then told them the best thing they could eat after a workout is hummus and pretzels. Okay, so and I've had athletes be taken off of whey protein, Jackie, because another weight cut person said, well, if they eat that protein, it's going to cause hypertrophy and make their cut nearly impossible. So I have had to deal with
Oh
that too.
boy.
In like an influx of different opinions along the way. And I don't get insulted. I just tell them, all right, that's fine. If you don't want to listen to me, I'm not saying, I'm the only person out there to listen to. But the biggest challenge I have had is the craziness of trying something new in the middle of the cut. And then
Hmm.
another weight cut coach, if you will, or even performance coach gets in their ear. And like I said, now their post-workout goes from a banana and whey protein, because God, that's going to put muscle on them and they'll never make the cut, to hummus and pretzels, which seemed like, the ultimate post-workout meal. And I'm not kidding with hummus and pretzels.
Listen, I don't know what you don't know about hummus, but it is like the magic tool for weight loss. I mean, I think it literally helps you lose 5 pounds after you eat it. So
Absolutely. And
it is great for weight cut.
loaded in complete protein, and boy, the pretzels, there's no better carb out there than the pretzel.
Listen, the pretzels, it depends what kind of pretzels though. Brands matter.
I would imagine. Yeah, I don't know, this one was from 7-Eleven, so
The best quality. That's the highest nutritional quality pretzels you can find.
specifically remember the manager of the fighter brought in the pretzels and hummus from 7-Eleven and goes to me, is this good? And at that point I was like, I don't want to make any problems because I
Yeah.
don't want these are title defenses. And I'm like, because
Oh
I was still
God.
training them for strength and conditioning. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Do it. Because again, you that's another thing. You know that, Jackie, we have to deal with like the cultural differences too, right?
Hmm.
Like if you are doing a weight cut for a boxer from Kazakhstan, they may have traditional methods in how they do it. Now they're going to take your advice and they're going to take your counsel, but the coaches may have a completely different way of approaching things,
100%.
right? So you and I, so there are times where I got somebody doing hot water immersion, and then the coach tells me on a Thursday night, oh, they decided to spar for 6 rounds when the fight is Friday, Saturday.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So,
Okay.
well, we're going to do technical sparring for 6 rounds. I just had them in, in a hot bath. They just lost 6, 7 pounds in a hot bath. Now you're going to throw plastics on them. The fight is Saturday, and you have them going through 6 rounds of technical sparring. So this is what we deal with. Like everyone says, oh, hey, if I would do nutrition for fighters, here's what I
They
would
don't
do.
know.
Yeah, you control so little,
They
right?
don't know. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that the coach thing really gets to me because that's that one time I called you out in Vegas. I think I called
Yes.
you, Corey, and someone else in the middle of the night because it was my boxer, and he didn't even do a big weight cut. He was what we just depleted him during the week. He was like maybe 2 pounds over after his evening workout the
Wow.
day before the weigh-ins.
That's
Wanted to come
fantastic.
back. Yeah, he was great. We had a great camp, and he was 2 pounds over. He finished the training, and he was just like, I want to do an Epsom salt bath. Like, not that I give a shit about if it has Epsom
Right.
salt or not. It doesn't matter. If he wanted a red rubber ducky, I would have gotten him a red rubber ducky. like whatever makes him comfortable.
At this point, I would be happy for that
If he wants
response over the
bubbles, like
others.
some incense, like we'll make it a whole experience. So I got him the Epsom salt. He got in the bath, and then I remember I told you his coach calls me in the middle of the night and rips me a new one, saying that I've ruined the entire fight because him laying in an Epsom salt bath for 20 minutes has relaxed his muscles too much, and now he's not going to be able to perform
Right.
on fight
Right.
day.
Well, that sounds absolutely so logical when you consider this is an elite level athlete and nervous system activation. By the way, this is the day before the fight or the day before the weigh-in?
The day before weigh-ins.
Okay. Right. So activating the nervous system would probably properly take him a whopping 30 minutes. Right? Even after, I'm talking after. I don't care if he did yoga, static stretching, for 3 hours. Then you put him in an Epsom salt bath and burn some incense, like you said, and meditated with the Dalai Lama. All right. That guy is still, as an elite young athlete, will be able to activate his nervous system within 45 minutes. Okay, little bit of
Easily.
dynamic stretching, right? Wake that athlete up, and he will kick right out of that where his muscles are completely inhibited and all of that parasympathetic influence. The whole point of getting them in shape is so they can go from 0 to 60 and 60 to 0,
100%.
right?
But because
Yeah.
he had 40 years of coaching experience and I'd only
Uh,
been doing it for a few years, despite all my education and your help and mentorship and everyone else that I've gotten advice from, I didn't know what I was talking about.
you see, well, that's just it, okay? And you but actually he fought really well, didn't he?
He did that. That was the one that ended up in a loss. He tore
He,
his like labrum in the first round.
okay.
And it just, yeah, it ended really badly actually. But it had nothing to do with the cut. It was the fact that they're, had a crazy injury. And he's like, I think
Yeah,
he
yeah.
had
I thought
shoulder
that
injuries before.
I remember that I don't. I remember that I thought that he didn't win, but he fought pretty well or tough
Yeah.
anyway.
It would I
Yeah.
mean, he toughed it out. Yeah. Like it was.
Okay. By the way, did you get the hit or the blame for that afterwards? Anything associated with the labrum? I hope not.
I got it. No, coach was actually
Okay.
really nice to me after the fact. It was just
Yeah.
that little blow up.
It happens too, and I think that's another thing you bring up, Jack. The stress, right? You can't, to some extent, in defense of the coaches, it's a big moment. They get crazy. They want everything to be perfect, despite whether or not it can be perfect. And if it doesn't go perfect, they panic, which makes the fighter panic, by the way. So, nevertheless, That's the other thing we have to work with. Like, if you go and you and I are doing a weight cut and we're working with somebody from Dagestan and their coaches do something different than we would like, let's just say for the water pull or a water load, or they train the day before, hours before the weigh-in. And this is just a hypothetical, but how are we going to argue with them? Their fighters are like 502. Right? I mean, everybody wins from there. They're absolutely incredible. So we have to incessantly adjust what we're going to do to what they did. Like I said,
Yeah.
I just pulled 6 pounds of water out of somebody thinking their training was done on a Thursday at about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're going to weigh in the next morning, Friday, at about 8 o'clock. And then coach says, oh yeah, we're going to run 6. And nobody filled me in on this. About 6 rounds of technical sparring in plastics that day, right? So
You're already dehydrated. We're going to make you fight like it.
already
'Cause it's
carb
building
depleted.
mental toughness.
Yeah, right. Well, let's work on that 14 weeks out instead of 14 hours before the weigh-in.
It blows my mind, like when we talk about it, but then you hear things like these fighters do. Like I had a girl that I was working with. She was like from Lithuania, and she told me that her process, she basically dehydrates herself 2 weeks out. Like for 2 weeks, she like starts at like 2 gallons, a gallon, then half a gallon, and like literally for an entire week, she's doing like maybe 2 liters of water, and then expects to drop like 9 pounds in one night. And I had to fight with her so aggressively to change it, and she didn't. She did it her way, and then ended up being miserable, but blamed me for the entire thing.
See, that's the challenge of this too, right? If everything goes right, you won't get blamed. Okay, you're not really going to get much credit.
You'll get zero credit. What do you get? Zero credit.
No doubt, no doubt. And that's okay, because that isn't why, you would like to at least acknowledge, okay, this went well, right? But 2 weeks out, I mean, I wouldn't put a cactus in a fight, okay? that hadn't had water in 2 weeks. Never mind a human being training. And again, they're probably Eastern European. They're tough. So to their credit, they are tough people.
Yeah.
And they'll train through anything. But can you imagine training 2 weeks dehydrated? Like, and to say one thing, if you want to tempt human physiology, in better words, make everything go wrong and stuff to perform well, well, then you join special operations, right? Or you join the military.
Yeah.
Because they're going to deplete you. You're not going to get any food as a Navy SEAL in Hell Week or a potential SEAL candidate for 2 weeks, or very little food. And you're going to be dehydrated, and you're going to be freezing, and you're going to carry logs into the ocean, and you have to operate calmly under the worst of conditions. But fighting is the exact opposite, right? There's money on the line. You don't try to prove yourself tough or tempt physiology because you want to be tough. You maximize it. I mean, if you don't, you're potentially losing hundreds of thousands of dollars by tempting physiology, meaning, oh, well, we'll tough it up and I won't drink for 2 weeks. So, changing that thought process, as we said too, because there are such cultural differences, is another huge challenge.
So why do you think, okay, so like pivoting off of that, because I feel like I've had this conversation so many times, and then people who aren't even in fighting, just if you're walking through it logically, because we always think like, okay, if you look at any other sport across the board, no other sport before a main event, the, NFL, like, before the Super Bowl, before like any like big basketball game, like a golf tournament, tennis, US Open, like none of these athletes are doing something that's literally killing their body like
You're right.
24 hours before a big event. Like they're resting, they're recovering, like, they appropriately peak themselves midway through their training. They bring it down. Like we're all about optimizing the body, right? Fighting's the only sport where they're like, let's undo everything we did during camp and kill ourselves 48 hours before a big event and think we're going to recover. So like, why do you think this is the culture, and why do you think fighters keep doing this? Is it, that toughness that they think they have to have? Is it bad advice from coaching? Like, what is it about this cohort of athletes that they continue to participate in these bad practices?
I think, and it's a great question. And to your point, nobody else does it. Imagine like before the Super Bowl, if you said to the Kansas City Chiefs, right? hey guys, you have 11 guys on the field, and all of those 11 guys must in total weigh less than this, right? So the whole team has to weight cut 24 hours before the Super Bowl because the whole team is 700 pounds over the limit.
Yeah.
The game would suck, right? It would just be blown out.
They
So
would feel like shit.
no doubt we'd have slower athletes, cognitively not processing well. But I guess the greater differentiation, and one could argue whether or not this helps. I think, Jackie, once they went to, so there are a couple of things. Obviously, everyone is afraid not to do it. I really believe that. Like if you say to somebody, hey, you're at your best at 205, right? Well, then they're worried that the guy that they're going to fight at 205 was at one time 260, and he's going to make the cut, and then they're going to go in about 210, and he's going to be 232. Right? I just think there's that fear, even still to this day. Well, they're doing it, I got to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be fighting so much bigger. And the key thing is, and that's because, again, the rules and regulations allow it, right? Like there's been no changes. And then the other thing, too, is the 36-hour window, in my view, from like maybe in the UFC, where an athlete will weigh in at 9 a.m. and they don't have to fight until potentially 8 the earliest in a fight night, let's say, or 7 p.m. the next day, right? So that's a total of what, about 7 and 10. So that's about a 34-hour window. It's good because it allows for greater recovery, but I also think the fighter knows I've got so much time to put carbs, water back into my body that then they go the other way. And they're willing to make it suck a lot more that week. So first, we could argue back and forth, and I think the UFC is doing the right thing by giving that high window, or let me say the best possible way to do it. But I do think, based upon what my experience with fighters is, they're always worried that someone is doing something they're not,
Yeah.
And I specifically remember I was working with a fighter who was a world champ, and there was another coach out there who was doing blood work like twice a week for that fighter. Oh, he does this. He reads the blood work. He reads this. This guy's all over it. He's brilliant. He's a genius. And then so my guys are going, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Why don't we cut the way he cuts? And it turned out his fighter just 2 months later got busted for EPO and Winstrol V. And then the guy who does the blood work, some other steroid, I don't know what it was. But then it turns out the guy who does the blood work says, well, I didn't know. Okay, well, then you're not
You're
that
testing
much.
the blood every 2 weeks. Yeah, okay, you didn't know.
Twice a week. So when his red blood cell count went from 14 to 16 to 17, or he's added 3 million RBCs to his count. You didn't pick up on that, but
Yeah.
the
Oh yeah,
point
you're testing
is,
it twice a week. Yeah, okay.
yeah, that's a
That's
pretty
crazy.
good
His
one.
nutrition is so good. He's eating so many beets. Like it's wild.
Yes, it was. What is that supplement with the beets? It's probably pretty good. I should use it because betaine is good. That's great. But anyway, I think one of the things to date is still the fear that someone else is going to do it. They may think I'm 6'3". I could make 205 easy and maybe go up to 215. I'm thinking somebody comes to my mind who could do this. But then again, what's their fear? The guy they're fighting was 6'4", maybe, made 205, and is going to rehydrate and refuel back up to about 225, 230. Mm-hmm. And that will probably get in their head a little bit. So I think fear is it, and stretching the parameter. And if they're a wrestler, they're used to cutting weight, but all disciplines do now, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's my guess.
I was gonna say, well, what point do you think, like in the history? Because, right, I mean, not to insult fighters, but they're not always the brightest, bulbs in the tanning bed. And they definitely are, like, once they hear something that they, somebody does, they're gonna follow it immediately without really asking too many questions. So, like, at what point do you think in the history of it, because you've been in it for so long, do you think that they just said it, that was just what it took to be a fighter, to, do the miserable weight cuts, that you had to wear the plastics and cut all of this weight, and then everyone just kind of followed suit. Like, I would think now, I mean, I'm hoping now the bigger names, that are out of the PI or work with Jordy or have worked with us, like, are understanding that they feel so much better when they do
Yeah.
things appropriately, and that they don't need to kind of go to the extremes in order to be at their best. And I'm like, why has that not kind of now trickled down to all of these other fighters? Like, even I don't know, maybe professionally I think it's changing a lot, but I still see it in a lot of the younger fighters, amateurs coming up, or just turned pro. They still do all of these really drastic measures when it comes to cutting, and it's just like, why? Like,
Yeah. I think to your point though, and you brought this up, I do think it's getting better. Maybe not at the rate, Jack, that you and I hope. But I do think, because you take a look, and I admire what Charles does there, because it's not easy, right? Like, a lot of times he has to put fires out because he's not seeing these athletes all year round. And then sometimes he may not see them to a week or two out. But what I think is really great is, I think he's had an influence in the UFCPI, has had an influence on the population, or the roster as a whole. Not everyone, but generally favorable. And the missed weights are down, I think, like 67, 70% as it pertains to the UFC. Now, to your question too, when did it change? Because if you remember the early days of the UFC, we really didn't even have weight classes. And Dana, rightfully so, and it preceded him, but they wanted to make this an international, worldwide sport. So for safety purposes, they started weight classes, and as they progressed, there were more weight classes. So as the weight class, I think, broadened the amount of athletes who could certainly step into the game, because at some given point, you don't want to be 5'6", even in the early days of the UFC, no matter how much of a badass you are, you don't want to be 5'6", 145 fighting somebody 6'2", 210, right? So it opened up the sport for more people. But then I think, whether it was through wrestling, kickboxing particularly, the jiu-jitsu to an extent, but definitely through wrestling, people would do anything to make that lighter weight. And as the weight classes advanced in number, it's been fantastic. It brings more athletes in, but it also brings in more people who could potentially try to go down to a lower weight, right? So if you had 4 weight classes, somebody would have to be 150 to 175. You're cutting down on how many people are making either. So I think it's a good thing. It's a safety measure, and it increases participation and fairness to extent. But as the weight classes increase, it also forces more people to go, I could go to that one instead of this one.
yeah.
And so that's a big part, I think, of what's done, and particularly in the UFC and MMA as a whole, not just the UFC. But now boxing, I think, is a little bit different to this extent. I think that they have older methods in many ways, because a lot of the coaches are old school, my age and older, and they used old school methods. But also the boxer genotype and phenotype is very different. I mean, the
Yeah.
boxer is the type of person that doesn't usually put weight on that easy. Usually narrow hips, and they
Mm-hmm.
better have narrow hips, because if they have wide hips and wide glutes, they're adding another 20 pounds to their body, and now they're fighting somebody 6 inches taller. So if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the boxing genotype, it's the long, lean leg, the narrow hip generally, but a good V to the back, pretty cut, not a huge chest. Don't get me wrong, chiseled and look awesome. But if you want to go back to the general body casting, they're more ecto than endo. All right. I know those are not very accurate, but they're more leaner and longer. So I
Yeah.
just think that they culturally probably had it a little bit easier to make those weights. But then you start adding wrestling, you're adding in a totally different body type too. More muscular,
Mm-hmm.
right? Thicker.
Stockier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stockier. And now they're trying to go down to, and listen, they did it. I mean, we just watched the national championships, and these young kids are studs, they're amazing athletes, and they push themselves to lower weight classes. But I think too, when the money is bigger, they're willing to take more risk,
Yeah.
right? If they think they're a 55er, but they have a great opportunity because at that time, the bantamweight is an empty class. They're going to try to push that extra 20
Mm-hmm.
pounds. So
Yeah.
I do think that's a big part of it, the risk involved. And I don't know. I don't know if that part will ever change, but fortunately, I think with people like you in the field now, and I tend to really think Charles and the team has done a great job. I think it's better, right? Not perfect, but better.
No, I agree. Do you think there's I definitely believe, I mean, obviously I haven't run studies, I've just been around these guys and girls long enough. We all know they're a little.
Yeah.
Do you think that psychologically, or that their psychology plays a big role, and then like mentioned earlier, kind of be like being addicted to the misery in some sort? Especially when you
Yes.
have guys that like to drop massive amounts of weights in short periods of time. They want to take the short notice fights. They know they're going to be miserable and starving. And even though the last weight cut, they were on the brink of death, but they survived it, they're like, no, I want to go do it again. And I'm like, I would be one and done.
You
Like,
would, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's almost traumatizing to him. I do think,
traumatizing to me. I had to walk,
yeah, right.
go
Oh, it definitely is. It definitely is.
traumatized.
You know what?
Hey,
You
talking
should
about
be
it.
because you give a crap, right? If you're
Yeah.
not traumatized by what they're going through, then you don't care.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's pretty simple. You don't care about them, and you don't care about the sport. But
No,
I
and
do think you're
honestly, I
right.
think it's making me soft over time. I don't, I hit the last three brutal weight cuts I went through. The last one, I was like, I never want to see somebody like this ever again. Like,
I
it was
understand.
horrifying. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, no, there it's bad. I mean, you see them. I've seen fighters cry, like and but you ask a great question in sports psychology. We've kind of got over the look. I think what we feel is you really there are good times you got to push in sports psychology. There are times you're not going to be in the mood, you suck it up, right? But if you're not enjoying yourself, the human body and brain are not good at getting good at something if you don't like it. I mean, it's simple. You just don't adapt. Like if you and I run 10 miles and hate every step, we're going to get cardiovascular benefit. We're going to get some benefit, not denying that. We'll have physiological adaptations, but it wouldn't be nearly as good for us if we loved running.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
I think there's a mentality in fighting still that if you're not sucking it up, you're not in pain, you're not pushing through because the other guy is, right? Then you're not doing enough. And that's still inherent in some of these fighters. And again, if you're coming from wrestling, you look at these kids, they're studs and girls, which I'm very happy to see women's wrestling grow. I watched the national championships over the weekends. Man, these kids push. These kids push through injury, Jack. They,
Yeah.
you know, they're cutting weight. By the way, they're making weight over months, not one time.
Hmm. No,
Months,
like
right?
multiple times a week. Yeah. The weekend
Exactly. So
tournaments, they're doing it so frequently. Yeah.
you're right. And so basically, their success has been tied in many cases to suck and wind. And I think that mentality is sometimes hard to break too. And that's why they might be willing to go through it or push it or, in some cases just say, well, I want to enjoy myself now. I'm not in the best of shape. I'll worry about it the last couple of weeks before fighting. People have
Yeah.
done that too. So it's hard to get into the psychology of why each fighter does it. But as the money grows, my fear is the risk taking will be greater.
Well, to me, okay, if the money is there, it makes sense. I'm talking about when there's not enough money on the line to be risking your entire life
Yes, yes,
to
yes.
make a weight.
That's a good
That's
point. You
I'm
said that.
talking, like for me, it's back to that one fighter, the one that was 198, make 55 in 4 weeks. I mean, it was a pro card, but not UFC or Bellator. It's not any of these big names or promotions by
Right,
any
right.
means. Maybe you're winning $5,000. He's probably like already in the hole. He's probably spending money, paying like he's probably paying to fight at this point with like
He really is. He's
everything he's
paying to
investing in
fight.
his training. Yeah, and like it's obviously difficult to ask them the question when you're in it, right? Because the first time we did the cut, He was really serious about dropping, and he like 10 minutes into the sauna, he starts like dry heaving, and I literally called him a little bitch. Like maybe that's my fault. I go, you're being a little bitch. Like we're 10 minutes. I can sit in a sauna for an hour straight.
Wait, was this the
Like
first sauna too?
this was the first sauna
Of the
session. So maybe that was my fault. Maybe I triggered something for the
wait,
lady.
this is not encouraging because he's got to lose 40 something pounds and he's been in the sauna for 5 minutes and he's already no, that's discouraging for you.
I was like, I'm giving up right now. This is not going to be a good night.
Wait, it's time. Hey, we got to lose 43 pounds. All right, well, let's get in the sauna for 10 minutes. And 5 minutes in,
And he's throwing up. I'm like, oh God. Are you sure? Are you sure you're a fighter? But then like but kind of to that point, I'm like, we kind of have this idea as their coaches too, that they're meant to be, a lot tougher, and kind of push themselves through these things. But like obviously in the moment, like I'm not going to ask him like, why do you want to be so miserable?
right, right.
Why
You
is it? And
can't,
like,
yeah.
of course if there's a loss, and that fight ended in a loss. Any bad cut that I've done has typically ended in a loss. I've seen very few do brutal weight cut and win. So I definitely think there's a big correlation between, the stress that you put your body through and then how you perform.
Particularly that kind of cut. That's
Mm-hmm.
crazy, right? If you'll just give me a second. So he was in 90, that's, that's 40 pounds that's, 20, not even on one, that's 30% over scale. More. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
I think we started the cut at 172.
Okay.
172 to make 55.
Wow. All right. Well, that's not crazy. The
No.
22 pounds. But when he started the whole thing, he was in the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, I can't see. I mean, that's tough to perform well at any. I don't care if you lost that weight over 10 weeks. You wouldn't, and another thing too, what we seem to forget, it isn't just about Jack making the weight. Like if you're suffering through camp, your skill acquisition sucks. You're
Mm-hmm.
not priming your skills, to the best of your ability because again, yeah, can you suck it up? Can you be a good fighter on no food? Yeah, yeah, but why would you? You're trying to win. You're not trying to prove anything. And to your point, that is dangerous when a young fighter who's fighting for $5,000 is willing to do all that, right? And take those kind of chances. And really, that's a point where you're really jeopardizing health. I think a good weight cut could be relatively safe. I do believe that, right? If you start at the right percentage, maybe 12% when camp starts, you have a good slow longitudinal weight descent, you're very heat acclimated, you release water easy. But when you get into those numbers, you got a young kid fighting at, you said, the amateur level. And that's a challenge, man. That's a risk I don't want to be a part of. But you are. If it's not with you, you're going to have somebody else out there, like we said, doing the cactus, right? Not drinking water for 2 months.
For 2 weeks, or doing their 30, was it the 72-hour water fast?
Oh man, 72-hour water fast. I had that. I had a
You had
fast.
some, yeah.
Yeah, I've had a food fast and a water
Oh,
fast
Jesus.
that somebody started right in the middle of camp, right?
Makes
Oh,
zero sense. I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
was it, I'm not going to name names. I think there's someone that we both know that's how they suggest starting their fight week, is doing a 24-hour fast.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic, right? Way to get out of the box and really
Like, that makes a
refine
lot of
your,
sense.
yeah, yeah. And by the way, if you care nothing about technique, maybe it's not a bad way to go. Don't even train, just lose the weight,
Yeah, just
right?
lose. I mean, I
You
think at that
probably
point,
be
just
better
don't eat
off.
for the entire week. I think that you're way better off doing that.
All
Yeah.
you're doing is practicing junk and fatigued, you
Yeah.
know?
It's building the mental toughness that you need for this fight.
That's all good, but you again, mental toughness can be built without torturing oneself,
Yeah.
actually. Yep. And on the way out, you might want to make a few bucks and win the fight. That's something that can
Yeah, that's the biggest point, right? Thought we were here to win and make money.
exactly.
All right. So to wrap that up, what would you say, for everyone listening, young fighters, even the pros who've been seasoned doing this forever, maybe even retired fighters that are trying to talk to the younger ones, what would be your one big key takeaway or piece of advice for them when it comes to cutting weight?
Okay, so I would say this. What matters most is what you're doing when you're not cutting, before the cut, because it's a story, right? Weight cutting, just in my view, is a story, Jackie. The story starts with, if I'm at this weight before the camp, right? Oh, wow. During these weeks, I can lose 1.5 to 2 pounds a week. I'll burn some fat. I'll minimize my muscle loss. I'll have the energy for skill. I probably won't be so starving that I can't not only train well, sometimes you go to bed hungry, you can't sleep. So I would say the most important thing is like anything else. You don't take off during the whole year for skill training. The most important thing is all what you do and how you manage your body when you're not doing a weight cut and before fight week. And I'm not saying that look, these fighters work hard, right? They do. They bust their tail and they should have a good time in life. And there are going to be times maybe they want some pizza. I get it. They want hamburgers. Maybe they party a little. I'm all for that. I really am. Some people let them, but when that is done after the fight, how you train within reason. I don't care if the fighter should be walking 4 miles a day just to manage body composition, just go for a walk. Don't even train that hard. You don't even have to kill yourself. Keep your body weight down by going for 10,000 steps a day without torturing yourself, right? What you do before the camp starts, to me, is far more important than what you're doing in your weight cut. Because if you go into it with a reasonable weight, no one is saying 2% over the scale. Well, I take that back. There are people saying that, which is lunacy, okay? But even 12, 15% before the camp starts, then you're going to have a process that not only allows you to advance your skill, also protect your health, energy, and confidence. So to me, weight cutting has less to do with how you behave when you're not weight cutting. Just don't get sloppy. Don't start with the 22, 25% above, because quickly to finish it, you're going to spend the first 2 weeks trying to get in shape. So that means your skill is going to suck and you're losing skill practice. Not only that, you're destroying your joints because you're so much heavier than you're going to be in the fight. And you're trying to do things that you should be doing when you're literally 20 pounds lighter. So you're shortening your career in that capacity. So listen to the numbers probably that are rational by the UFC, by the ISSN, what you recommend. Try to stay in the 12 to 15% above the scale. And then you will have a pretty easy weight cut and you'll feel good. You'll become a better fighter during that time. And you'll go into the dawn fight with better skill, better performance, and better health.
Yeah, I tell everyone when they come to me last minute, they want help and tips when it comes to the last 2 weeks or the week before their fight. It's like the damage has already been done.
Yes.
It's too late. Preparation is key and it needs to be done outside of the camp because the camp shouldn't be the focus. The focus of your camp shouldn't be dropping weight because you're sacrificing everything else.
You got it perfectly.
It should be to focus on becoming a better athlete and increasing your performance, your strength, your power, your agility, your skills. So when you got to drop so much weight in camp, then you're sacrificing all of those things because now we're just worried about you hitting the scale weight.
It's exactly right. And I believe to a large extent when that training volume increases, to your point, you're cutting your career short because you're beating the hell. Nobody wants to be on their feet, grappling and wrestling and kicking with 30 more pounds on their body than they need. No. Yeah. So
awesome.
That's my thing. What you do when you're not cutting weight is what matters most.
Absolutely. That's going to be the soundbite for this episode.
Yeah.
All right, that is all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, hit that follow button and drop a review. Tony, where can people find you if they want to reach out or if they have questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of that type of guy who hides a little bit, but I'm just on Instagram. I'm and I'm on Facebook, but nobody in your age or generation. Facebook is terrible now. Everyone don't go to it anyway. Everybody just fights about politics. But I
It's
am,
meta. Get with the program.
yeah. I should get on. What should I get on? I'll probably try TikTok, but I am
I
on
like.
Instagram, and it's Sport Sci under Tony Ricci, SPORTPSY_SCI, Sports Sci Doc.
Awesome. If you guys don't follow him, do. And he's always speaking at ISSN and Society for Neurosports.
Yes, I'm vice
Oh yeah.
president and very proud of that.
Yes. So if you guys ever want some more information, you got to come to those conferences because they're amazing with amazing people.
Okay.